What's up, fellas? Like the new shirt? It's the Napoli Valentine's edition. So if you thought the Premier League relegation battle of last year was pretty crazy, this one's even more insane. We'll start at the middle of September with 7 games played. West Ham, who managed a 7th place finish just last year, were placed 18th after 7 games. Newly promoted Nottingham Forest, who would sign a random cashier from Tesco if they could, were tied with 4 points behind them. But the biggest shock was Leicester City. Their attack was decent, scoring 10 goals. However, their defense was an absolute clown show. The Foxes had already conceded 22 times, with the main culprit being Danny Ward, who was keeping worse than a blind man. But not only were Leicester bottom of the table, they hadn't won a match yet. Only Elche were as bad as them in the top 5 leagues up to this point. 2 weeks later, into the beginning of October though, we'd see Leicester finally get their shit together and wallop rivals Nottingham Forest 4-0. West Ham earned a win as well against Fulham to jump out of the relegation zone, while Wolves, after a 3-0 loss to Chelsea, fell to 18th and as a result sacked manager Bruno Lage. Interim coach Steve Davis then took charge. 18 days later, we'd see yet another sacking. Aston Villa, who were placed 17th, sacked Steven Gerrard. Aaron Danks was placed as interim, and then at the beginning of November, Unai Emery was appointed the new manager. Fast forward to the end of October, the relegation battle was getting even tighter. From 9th to the relegation zone was a 5-point gap. Leeds, Aston Villa, and Southampton were both tied with 12, just dangling over the fiery pits. However, the bottom 3 hadn't changed much since the beginning of October, but Leicester were starting to climb back up after going unbeaten in 3 of their next 5 games. One of those matches included a win where Leicester sent Wolves to the pound to hop into 18th. Leicester's defense improved as well in October, conceding just 2 times. Up to this point, there were only 2 teams that scored less than 10 goals, Wolves and Forest. 19th place Wolves had a forgettable October, winning just once throughout scary season. Their only win came against Nottingham Forest, who were bottom of the table with 9 points. However, we were starting to see signs of the team gelling after Forest drew with Brighton and then triumphed over Liverpool at home. 3 weeks after that victory, Forest earned yet another win against Palace to lay just on the outskirts of safety. Meanwhile, Leicester earned another 2 straight wins to lunge out of danger into 13th. Everton, who were 12th at the beginning of November, fell like a rock after 2 straight losses. The Toffees now found themselves just 1 point above the relegation zone. Speaking of the relegation zone, we had a new team book a room at Hotel Hell. Southampton had lost 3 straight and dropped into 19th. And so finally, after 4 years, Southampton pulled the plug on Ralph Hasenhüttl and replaced him with 2021-22 EFL Championship Manager of the season, Nathan Jones. Bottom of the table was now Wolves, who under new management weren't doing any better. However, there was some newfound hope with the appointment of former Sevilla manager Julen Lopetegui. Fast forward to the beginning of January, after the World Cup break and a couple matches played, there's a few position changes throughout the bottom half of the table. Leeds and newly promoted Bournemouth switch positions, as do Everton and West Ham, while the bottom 3 consist of the same teams. However, after earning their first win since mid-October, Wolves hop over Southampton. 1 week later, and there's quite a shakeup. Every team from 15th downwards dropped points except for Nottingham Forest, who defeated bottom place Southampton. This saw Forest jump out of the relegation zone all the way into 15th. Everton suffered a massive loss to Brighton, which dropped them from 16th to 18th. It only got worse for the Toffees the very next week, when after a 1-0 lead at the break, Everton conceded 2 unanswered goals against the worst team in the league. This saw Southampton break their horrific 6-game losing streak, and Everton slipped into 19th. Another huge match in the relegation battle happened that same week. 18th place Wolves versus 17th place West Ham. In the match, Daniel Podence would score the only goal and sent Wolves soaring to 16th, while West Ham continued their winless run post-World Cup and sink into the relegation zone. However, their time there doesn't last long after a 2-0 win against Everton the following week. Everton's 3rd straight loss prompted them to end things with Frank Lampard. In his place came the Brexit football man himself, Sean Dyche. Bournemouth may have produced a draw with Nottingham, but their past was starting to catch up with them. 8 losses in their last 10 saw them go from 10th in mid-October to the relegation zone for the first time this season. Now into February, and immediately Everton's managerial change pays off. You Viz. Bournemouth added yet another loss to the year and are now 19th. Meanwhile, Wolves drop a masterclass performance against Liverpool and hop over West Ham once again. Leeds United, who hadn't won a match since the beginning of October, were slowly dwindling down the table, and after a loss to Nottingham Forest, they were now level with 18th place Everton. This was enough for Leeds to ditch freedom ball as interim coach Michael Skubala took control.
Fellas, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this video,
Tennis Clash. It's a free mobile PvP tennis sports game with super high-end graphics and gameplay that is the epitome of excitement. Unlike US youth football, this app is completely free on both iOS and Android, and just look at these ratings. Tennis Clash for the second time is partnering with the Roland Garros tournament and is hosting a virtual tournament where 8 finalists will go to Paris with all trip expenses paid by Tennis Clash to play the final match. And first and second place will share a cash prize of 5,000 euros. Finding a match is quick and easy, and you'll always be matched with players at the same skill level as you.
So it's pretty simple how you play this game. All you have to do is swipe your finger at a certain direction and it'll go that direction. I can move the player actually, and you can see this way it's a lot easier to approach the ball. Boom, scored another point. All right, boys, match point. We got this in the bag. Too easy.
What makes this game all the more special is that I can play with different characters and decide what ability I want to focus on. Forehand, backhand, agility, stamina, and so on. I've been running it up with Jonah since he's quick and can run without ever breaking a sweat with that sweet 40 stamina. You can also invite your friends to play Tennis Clash with you. So download Tennis Clash with the link in the description. By doing so, not only will you be supporting the channel, you'll have a ton of fun and have the chance of flying out to Paris and winning a massive cash prize. Good luck, and I'll see you there.
The following week doesn't see many changes aside from the fact that Leeds now have a 1-point gap between them and 18th place Everton. Southampton under Nathan Jones hasn't gone well at all. In 7 games, the Saints lost 6, and now the gap between them and safety was 4 points. So Southampton went back to the drawing board, sacked Nathan Jones, and appointed former Valencia U18s coach Ruben Sayas. And once more, the managerial change does it again. Southampton at Stamford Bridge defeated Chelsea 1-0. They're still 20th, but have closed the gap by 1 point. Everton jumped out of danger into 16th after Seamus Coleman mic'd Leeds United. Bournemouth earned their first victory of the year against Wolves and returned to safety in 17th, 1 point above West Ham, who lost to Tottenham. With the win for Bournemouth, Leeds now found themselves in 19th, 2 points from safety. However, Walmart Los Blancos finally found their man to help them survive, former Valencia manager Javi Gracia. And for a third time, the new manager meta does the trick and Leeds earned their first victory in 11 games against 20th place Southampton. West Ham once again step out of the relegation spots after a massive win against Forest. All the while, both Everton and Bournemouth fall back into danger after losing their respective matches. Bournemouth in particular weren't enjoying life post-World Cup, earning the least amount of points of any other team. But Wolves, who started post-World Cup bottom, were earning the 8th most points since. Into the first week of March, and Southampton earned yet another win to climb into 19th, 2 points from safety. Keep an eye on Leicester, by the way, and not for good reason. It may look like they've recovered in 15th, but they're only 2 points from danger and have lost their last 3 straight matches. However, there were 3 other teams flirting with danger even more. 18th place Everton drew with Forest to now be tied with 17th place Leeds on points, while West Ham was just 1 point above them. Bournemouth lost to Arsenal in heartbreaking fashion after initially being 2-0 up with 60 minutes played. The football gods were not done tormenting the Cherries though, as they now found themselves bottom of the table. Bournemouth though bounced back up immediately the following week, when they got revenge against Liverpool after initially losing 9-0 to them at the beginning of the season. Southampton managed a 0-0 draw with United, but are still back at the bottom. Everton, who sat in the first relegation spot, had now returned to safety after another huge win. And of course, the goal scorer had to be one of Sean Dyche's former underlings, Dwight McNeil, although back into the relegation zone is Leeds after a hard-fought 2-2 draw with Brighton. That isn't necessarily too much of a worry though, considering the gap between them and safety is just a single point. Speaking of gaps, from 12th down to 18th is now a slim 3-point difference this late into the season. Aside from Wolves, no other team looked like they could escape. 12th place Palace were on a 10-game winless streak. 14th place Nottingham had a fantastic January, seeing them reach a high 13th. But since their high, they've earned just 5 points in their last 6 games. It was even worse for 16th place Leicester, who had now lost their last 4 straight matches. Next match day saw Leeds respond brilliantly to the pressure, defeating Wolves 4-2 at Molineux, just their second away win of the season. And because Bournemouth, Leicester, Forest, and Everton all dropped points, Leeds leaped all the way into 14th with the game in hand. Going back to Everton though, they had to play Chelsea at Stamford Bridge and earned a huge point after coming back twice against the Blues. Crystal Palace may still be 12th, but have lost every single game in March. Thus, the board sent manager Patrick Vieira packing and replaced him with 400-year-old Roy Hodgson. The beginning of April gave us a match between two teams desperate for points. Leicester versus Crystal Palace. 55 minutes played, Ricardo Pereira draws first blood for Leicester as he slaps it into the top corner. However, 3 minutes later, Eberechi Esse scores a brilliant free kick to tie it all up. Then into the 3rd minute of stoppage time, substitute Jean-Philippe Mateta turns beautifully and scores the winner for Palace. Palace earned their first win of the year and are now 4 points clear of relegation, while Leicester continue their abysmal form and fall back into danger. And finally, the club sacks Brendan Rodgers. Some other big games included West Ham vs Southampton, where Nayef Aguerd gave the Hammers all 3 points to soar all the way up to 14th. Nottingham Forest and Wolves played out a 1-1 draw. However, Forest really came out as the losers because now they're just 1 point from safety. Bournemouth produced a Vitality Stadium classic and came back from 1-0 down to defeat Fulham. With this win, they're now 16th after Leeds produced a dreadful result against Arsenal. Into midweek, Everton steal a point from Spurs thanks to the annual clutch Goodison banger. That result brings them back to 16th. Leeds earn another massive victory, this one against Nottingham Forest. With that win, they go from 17th to 13th, while Forest are now 17th, tied with 18th place Bournemouth, who lost to Brighton. Leicester are so bad that not even the new coach meta is working for them as they lose to Aston Villa. And after West Ham were demolished by Newcastle, this was the table now. From 15th to 18th, everyone is tied on points. Hell, from 12th to 20th is just a 7-point difference. 3 days later, and another match day was complete. Leicester apparently thought they were playing St. Louis FC and gifted an early goal to Bournemouth. The Cherries held on till the end and leave the relegation zone. Taking their place is now Forest, who lost to Aston Villa. They're tied on points with 17th place Everton, who lost 2-0 to United. Wolves and West Ham both bounced back in spectacular fashion and are now 13th and 14th respectively.
Just a reminder to say that after Leeds win tonight, I'm going to be live over on Whatnot at 6 o'clock selling some high-end football shirts after Leeds win. Alright, I'll see you tonight.
A few moments later.
So I had to go and do another recording because of, obviously, the next match day that happened over the weekend. Everyone from 16th down failed to earn any points. And with every team from 15th up to 12th earning points, the gap has now widened a little bit. The Hammers took advantage of the Gunners bottling, again. Then there was Bournemouth, who stole a winner away in Tottenham in the 5th minute of stoppage time to grab all 3 points and hop into 14th. Wolves continued their winning ways, defeating Brentford 2-0. Roy Hodgson has become the wise old man at the top of the mountain, guiding his children to safety as Palace once again earn another 3 points. And lastly, Leeds are So as it stands, with 7 or 8 games remaining, the difference between safety and danger is still insanely slim. Bottom place Southampton is just 4 points away from safety. While they've managed to pick themselves up a little bit since their win against Leicester City, they've earned just 2 points in their last 6 games. Not to mention, the Saints have only scored 9 goals this year. Leicester are very lucky to only be 2 points away despite being on an active 4-game losing streak. Even worse, they've earned just 1 point in their last 9 games. 18th place Nottingham Forest and 17th place Everton are currently tied on points. Things though are looking far grimmer for Forest. They have the worst goal difference of the two and have earned just 3 points in their last 10 games as opposed to Everton, who've earned 9. Leeds are just 2 points above them. But don't let them being currently safe make you think they're any better than anyone below them. Leeds since the beginning of January have conceded the most amount of goals. West Ham and Bournemouth have a slightly bigger cushion as they're 5 and 6 points above the relegation zone. Bournemouth, after falling like a rock due to their performances in 2023, have massively improved. In their last 10 fixtures, the Cherries have impressed and earned 16 points. West Ham have improved massively since their run at the end of 2022. It's not as much as Bournemouth, but they've earned 13 points in their last 10 games. All the while, it appears both Wolves and Palace have both recovered from their ruts and are now aiming towards the upper echelons of the table. Oh, and by the way, Chelsea are just 3 points above Palace. And remember when Aston Villa was briefly in 17th? They're now 6th. According to 538, the teams most likely to relegate are Everton, Nottingham Forest, and Southampton. Going into the last 7 games, 20th place Southampton have a 91% chance of relegation, and it makes sense considering their attack is less threatening than a puppy. The Saints have only scored 7 goals since the beginning of February, the least of any other team in the league. So far, their top scorer is free kick magician James Ward-Prowse with 7, but he's faded a bit in form. On a positive note at least, their defense is slightly better than most of the other relegation candidates. But a far bigger issue is the fact that they have the 5th hardest schedule going forward. The Saints still have to play Arsenal, Newcastle, Brighton, and Liverpool. Just above them, with an 81% chance of falling back to the championship, is 19th place Nottingham Forest. Forest since the beginning of February have had the 2nd worst attack, tied with Chelsea. Overall though, they've had one of the worst attacks all season. And while Brennan Johnson was having a fantastic beginning to 2023, he's also faded in form. Defensively, it's not looking any better, as Forest have conceded the 2nd most goals since the beginning of February. And Forest fans, if you still somehow have a glimmer of hope after all of this, let me just say you have the 3rd most difficult schedule going forward. Liverpool, Brighton, Brentford, Chelsea, and Arsenal all await you before the gates of hell. Predicted to be the last of the relegated teams is 17th place Everton, which is interesting considering Everton have scored the most points than 7 other teams since the beginning of February. However, it could come down to the fact that they have the 8th most difficult schedule, which is the 4th most difficult of the relegation candidates. Everton's defense in the last 10 games has been subpar and is tied with Southampton. Their goal scoring isn't really helping either. They've had the 4th worst attack since the beginning of February. What's even scarier though is the fact they don't really have any distinct goal scorer like Richarlison last season. Everton's top scorers with 4 goals are Damari Gray and Dwight McNeil, but perhaps Alex Iwobi's 6 assists and the energy of Goodison during a relegation fight could give the Toffees hope. The website surprisingly still has some trust in Leicester, as they only have a 38% chance of relegating. On paper, it makes sense. They have the 4th easiest schedule going forward. However, while that's the case, Leicester have been shitting the bed against even the worst of teams. The Foxes currently have a mediocre attack amongst the whole league, and definitely one of the best in terms of the relegation battle. Currently, James Maddison and Harvey Barnes have been putting the team on their backs. The problem though has been their leaky defense throughout the entire season. Since the beginning of February, they have conceded the 3rd most goals in the league. And finally, there's Leeds, who have a 24% chance of relegating. Since the beginning of February, they've scored the 9th most goals. Overall, Rodrigo has scored 11 goals for Leeds, while youngsters like Crescencio Somerville and Willie Gnotto have shined throughout the season. But just like Leicester, their defense has been an utter show. 27 goals have been conceded since the beginning of February, and 60 throughout the entire season, both league worst. And the remaining schedule for Leeds could get really interesting. They have the 7th most difficult schedule and still have to play Fulham, Man City, Newcastle, and Tottenham. And honestly, the Leeds games I would watch out for just because of how insane the scorelines could be, especially the one against Leicester. And now for this final segment, here's a list of all the huge games in this intense battle going forward. Matchday 32 will give us Crystal Palace vs Everton, Leicester vs Wolves, and Bournemouth vs West Ham. Matchday 33 provides us Wolves vs Crystal Palace, Leeds vs Leicester, and the Battle of the Beaches, Southampton vs Bournemouth. Matchday 34 will give us Crystal Palace vs West Ham, Bournemouth vs Leeds, and Leicester vs Everton. Matchday 35 we only have Forest vs Southampton. Matchday 36 we get a battle between Crystal Palace vs Bournemouth. Matchday 37 will give us West Ham vs Leeds and Wolves vs Everton. Finally, Matchday 38 gives us Palace vs Forest and Leicester vs West Ham. A lot of very interesting matches going forward, and maybe I'll go back and review them once this whole relegation battle is done. All I can say though is Premier League relegation battles have just gotten more and more chaotic as the seasons go, so you definitely cannot take your eyes off this relegation battle one bit. But what do you guys think? Who will relegate? Who will survive? Let me do my prediction real quick, just to jinx a few teams. I think who's going to be relegating will be Southampton. I just don't think that attack will get any better. 19th, I will say Nottingham Forest. And then finally, the last team to relegate will be Leeds. I just can't see how you can survive with that many goals being conceded. That being said though, Leeds have done this before and survived, so anything can happen, and that's just what's going to make it even more fun to watch. But of course, a massive shout out to all our patrons, including Janos Barash, Chris Damasceno, Miliaway009, Aldipu, Alex Rod, Ulta, Amin Suamez, Aresan, Carlos Anaya, Daniel Ortiz, Francisco Hernandez, Guy, Joel Carvalho, Jonah, Marco Fujimoto, Miguel Munoz, Return Fire, Rory Burns, Saw, Slider Kit, Snifferx, The Motor Drive, Tomicus, Vanilla Mexican 17, Victor, Dominic Griffin, Emmett Shea, Lewis, Joe Paricio, Michael Nista, MX Weeb, Niche, Patrick Barley, and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to join the Patreon, there'll be a link down below and up in the annotations. You can follow my Twitter if you want, follow my Instagram if you like, follow my TikTok, trying to get to 20,000 there, and of course, you can follow my very inactive Twitch. Trust me, I'm trying to get it back up. But until then, I'll see you guys.